Okay. Hello and greetings, everyone. And we just have to start now. So, um, I feel so delighted to having to have Professor Russell to be in our midst today. I got connected with Professor Russell in 2022. So we got connected on LinkedIn and we started talking about what we do, and he is such a mentor, and he tried to simplify everything that got to do with the biology of aging and its related diseases and conditions. So when I reached out to him, I shared with him my projects in Africa, and he was so excited that something is happening with longevity and aging in Africa. So he shared with me some of his works, including the effective intervention on aging. He shared his project, which happens to be the deck of his project, which he will explain to us briefly. And we started talking, and later he shared some important works on the aging
I didn't
book.
get a message the other night. Yes, you got. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, please mute yourself. And when I reached out to him with regards to this educational program, he was excited. He said, "Oh, look, we're going to do this." So, and for me, having him in our midst is such a pleasure and honor because he is one of the real guys doing something when it comes to the biology of aging. I mean, I'm not trying to hype his person. This is something that I am sure of. I've gone through some of his literature, some of his researches, and I know that these are the type of persons that you need in your camp if you want to achieve something meaningful with regards to the biology of aging. So the education, there are a whole lot of misconception. There are a lot of people that overhype things. There are a lot of people that make promises that do not even understand what is being discussed in the biology, in the niche of aging and longevity. But I think when you look at people that are doing critical work that are translatable, not just that are translatable. His company is translating his idea, and he's an expert when it comes to protein therapy for Alzheimer diseases. And that is the core of what they do. So I'm going to yield the mic to for him to give us a little bit of his background, and then we get into the lectures proper. Thank you so much, Prof.
Oh, thank you. I can't tell you, I'm honored and pleased. I'm delighted to be with you guys. And anybody who wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, and anything I can do to help anybody, please do. I recognize there's an awful lot I don't know. The older I get, I'm 75 now. The older I get, the more I realize I don't know anything. It's just that I'm less certain than I used to be when I was a lot younger. On the other hand, I think that as the years go by, we begin to understand things better than we used to. So I will tell you a little bit about me as I'm going through the talk. But I'm just going to start and put some slides up, start talking. And I'd be delighted again to stay in the end and talk to anybody who wants to ask questions or otherwise interact with me. That's sort of where I am. That makes sense to you? Here I go.
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So what I want to talk about then is, as I say, reversal. I'm not going to talk about getting an extra year of your life or delaying your osteoarthritis. I actually want to talk about age reversal. So it's a little different than most talks. Let me put this in some perspective here. Get this one. There we go. So let me start by talking about longevity in general, what I mean by that. This is sort of the quick and dirty idea of what happened to our populations over the past 200 years. And it sort of depends very much where you are in the world. But roughly speaking, we have begun to rectangularize the human lifespan. That is, a lot of us now live longer than we used to. So the average age at death, for example, used to be 25, it was 50, and now the average is around 75. But that maximum of maybe 125 or so has never really changed. And what we're talking about doing is changing that. That is going to the green curve, not the red, purple, or blue curve, but doing something dramatically different. We're talking about not, as I say, shortgevity, but longevity. So rather than almost all of the things that almost any of us can do now, whether you're involved in clinical medicine or anything else, tends to be incremental. Again, you're trying to, for example, with Leqembi in Alzheimer's, you're trying to slow down the vector for Alzheimer's disease. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about wholesale reversal, cure and prevention of age-related diseases and aging in general. So it's a very different topic in many ways. Let me start. I'm going to parallel my book in some respects for this, although a lot of the material will be different. But first, I want to talk about what aging is not. And I first got involved in aging 50 years ago, actually, when I was teaching neuroanatomy at Stanford. And I was involved in the way the nervous system develops, but I got intrigued by the way the nervous system falls apart. And I found that whenever I talked about aging or age-related diseases, people always shrugged and said, it just happens. It's entropy, it's wear and tear. What do you expect? Things fall apart. And I found that a very blasé attitude. I suspect that anytime people think that things just happen, it means that they haven't paid much attention. Mute, please. Thanks. So things are always more complicated than people think they are. But I got intrigued by it, and I realized that there were at least two problems that we had. One is that we tended to have a partial view, sort of like the blind man and the elephant. We looked at the trunk, we looked at the tail, we looked at the tusks, we looked at the legs, but we didn't have a whole elephant when it came to aging. And it was frustrating for me because I wanted to do research on it, but all I saw were pieces of the elephant. The other is what I call the narrow view. We tend to interpret the world in terms of what we see around us. I mean, any of us who look around know the world is flat because it looks flat, but it's not. It's because we're looking too narrowly at what's around us. And if we broaden our perspective, we learn a lot. So first thing is, as I say, this blind man and the elephant problem. We tend to look at aging as mitochondrial changes, methylation changes, DNA repair changes, free radicals. There were very big discussions of that, back in the 80s, for example. And yet, how do they all fit together to make one elephant? That's really the question that was on my mind. So this still goes on today. People talk about biomarkers. And I want to emphasize that those are only pieces of the elephant. Aging is not a biomarker. Aging is a complex cascade of things that results in those biomarkers. So, for example, when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, beta amyloid is not Alzheimer's. It is an outcome of some process that results in Alzheimer's. And one of the hallmarks, one of the biomarkers is Alzheimer's, is the beta amyloid. But aging is no more just biomarkers than a disease is just symptoms. If somebody has COVID, I don't think that COVID consists of a fever and anosmia and a high white count and aches and pains. It is a viral infection. Biomarkers in COVID or in aging are critical for us to follow what's going on, but they're not the underlying process, and we shouldn't confuse the two. I'll give you some examples of this. Where's your clinical biomarkers of aging? Gray hair, memory loss, weakness, and so on. None of these are aging, and yet they're very common outcomes of aging. But they aren't aging itself. They're things that we can measure, and it's useful to do that. It's critical that we do that, but they're not aging. If we get down a little deeper, cellular biomarkers, inflammation, for example, a decline in DNA repair, increased mutations, methylation changes, all of these things are hallmarks of aging or biomarkers of aging, including telomere shortening, which we'll come back to. But by themselves, they're not aging. They're features of aging, but they're not the process per se. Same thing when we go a little deeper to genetic biomarkers. Now, these are a list of some of the typical biomarker or genetic biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease, but none of these defines Alzheimer's. You can have two ApoE4 genes and not get Alzheimer's. You can have two ApoE2 genes and get Alzheimer's. Likewise for all these things. So they're useful to know about, but they don't tell you what's going on. They don't define the process. The other problem, as I say, is that people tend to look too narrowly. They think that aging is just entropy, and it's not. Aging is actually a failure of maintenance in the face of entropy. It's not entropy. It's something a little more different than that. And I'll give you examples why I say this. First of all, aging is not ubiquitous. Not everything ages. If you think about how old all of us are, as I say, I'm 75, but the cells that started me came from my mother, got it from my grandmother, got it from great-grandmother. And those cells go back almost 4 billion years on this planet. So you could say I'm 4 billion years old. Well, so why didn't the germ cell, as a provenance, why didn't it age? And yet clearly I do now. The same thing goes with mitochondria. We can trace the maternal mitochondria that result in me and in everyone in this audience back about 2 billion years. So why is it that your mitochondria really do show deficits over a matter of decades, and yet retrospectively they didn't for 2 billion years? Why? So we can't just say it's entropy without explaining why there are exceptions to it. Or this, I used to, when I chair conferences globally on age-related disease, if mitochondria aging causes aging, then what causes mitochondrial aging? The same for inflammation. If aging in the immune system causes aging, what causes aging in the immune system? We used to do this with pineal glands and other things over the past 100 years. No matter what you identify, the question is, all right, but what caused that in the first place? So why do they fail after fertilization, for example, in mitochondria? They clearly do. These are just some of the findings that a friend of mine, Ed Byrne, has been finding in the past 20, 30 years. And he has the same question. It's true that your mitochondria fail, but why? Why did they fail when they didn't for 2 billion years? Here are other exceptions. Up in the upper left there, or my upper left, that's Coco the gorilla. I used to babysit Coco. She was the only gorilla who spoke sign language. I was her babysitter for a year. She spoke sign language better than I do. It's humiliating. But gorillas have an average lifespan of about 40 years. You and I, 75 or so years. Typical dogs, maybe a decade or two, depending on the breed, the species. The same with cats. Mice, you get down to a handful of years. Why do they have different lifespans? Again, you can't just say it's entropy without explaining why entropy appears to run at different rates, not only in the germ cell lineage and mitochondria, but in different species. Here's another example. These are progeric children, Hutchinson-Gilford progeric children. I used to gather them together from all over the world back about 30 years ago. And in this case, I've just given them a tour of the White House. It took them places you're not allowed to go, took pictures you're not allowed to take, until a little boy in the front row with a red hat there stepped on a sensor going up to the private quarters, and Secret Service threw us out. These kids die at an average age of 12.7, overwhelmingly of age-related disease, usually heart attacks, strokes, that kind of thing. Very rarely do they have Alzheimer's, by the way, but they do if they last long enough. Likewise, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, wrinkly skin, bald. The only ones here who have hair are wearing wigs. Why did those kids die so young? Well, we know the gene involved, but that doesn't tell us how it works. Why do they die so quickly? So that's kind of the problem we have with aging, what aging isn't. Let me talk a little about what it is. Here's a quick overview of it. And it is simplified. But you lose cells. I mean, every time I touch myself, I lose cells in my skin. The remaining cells divide to replace those, telomeres shorten. That changes the pattern of gene expression. As I said, the difference between me when I'm 7 and me 75 is not a different gene, it's a different expression. I'm changing the pattern of gene expression. And that slows down molecular turnover, which turns out to be critical in a lot of ways. And the result is you accumulate dysfunctional molecules, and then you get cell dysfunction, and then tissue and organ level disease, and we have age-related disease and aging. That's the quick and dirty view of it. So here's some examples of this. Mitochondrial function. What you find is that if you look at things like cytochrome C oxidase, aerobic enzyme, the turnover rate slows down as cell senescence, cell aging occurs. The result is that when you look for an average cytochrome C oxidase molecule, it's damaged because it hasn't been replaced, recycled as fast. The same is true of the lipid membranes. The same is true of the scavengers, superoxide dismutase, catalase, and so on outside. And the same is true of the damaged molecules. So as you get older, it turns out the turnover rate of the aerobic enzyme slowed down, and then you get more free radicals. They leak more into the cytoplasm. They cause more damage because they're not scavenged, and the damage they caused isn't repaired as fast. So for 4 reasons in a row right there, you see why we begin to get damage accumulation as a result of mitochondrial dysfunction. But the primary problem isn't in the mitochondria, it's back in the nucleus that slows down all that turnover. Same is true when you look at DNA repair. We know that your risk of cancer goes up with age, but why does it go up? And it turns out that the detection of the error goes down. That is the turnover rate for detecting enzymes that are responsible for that. The enzymes responsible for excising the damaged base go down, so they're not moving as fast. Replacement goes down, the ligation goes down. So for 4 separate reasons, you've got this exponential increase in cancer. And by the way, it's not your age, it's your aging that does it. That is, if you look at almost any species, you see the same, whether it's a 2-year-old mouse or whether it's an 80-year-old human, you begin to get the same exponential curve. It's not the years, it's cell aging that does this. A couple of caveats. One is, it doesn't matter how long your telomeres are. The question is, how fast do you lose them? This is a graph looking at different species, and you find that whatever species you look at, mice, for example, have telomeres that are probably 10 times longer than mine in many cases. And I have telomeres that I have a lifespan 40 times longer than theirs. It's not the telomere length, it's the change in gene expression that it induces. So it's not the absolute telomere length, but it's a relative change in telomeres as cells divide. So that's one of the reasons why you just can't look at telomere length between species and learn a darn thing. You have to ask how fast they lose them. Same thing for this. Almost every study I look at out there in the medical literature or the scientific literature, looking at white blood cell telomeres, are measuring the wrong thing. They're looking at white blood cell telomeres and they're trying to correlate that with heart disease or Alzheimer's disease or renal failure. Well, leukocytes are not the primary cause of any of those diseases. This would be like saying, I know you've got osteoarthritis in your knee because you've got gray hair. Well, there's a correlation, but that's a very bad way to make a diagnosis. Same thing here. Almost all the literature looks at telomere lengths in white cells, leukocytes, because they're easy to get at, but they have almost nothing to do with the conclusions that these papers draw. I've turned them down numerous times on as a medical editor. It's good data, bad interpretation. Here's another one. People talk about cell aging as though they only mean the endpoint, when cells stop dividing. But in fact, there are these gradual changes that occur in gene expression throughout your life. Your cells, your gene expression is different at age 20 than it is at 40, than it is at 60, even though the cells we're looking at may actually not be in replicative senescence. That is, they're still dividing, they're just acting differently. So the literature is full of these discussions of cell aging, and somebody means one thing, somebody means another, and it gets in the way of the literature. Same thing goes when we're looking at cancer. As it turns out, and somebody please mute. If you're looking at cancer risk, if you get a completely shortened telomere, short as you can get it, it'll generally stop dividing, and that's a safe thing in a way because your cancer risk goes down. There are some exceptions. It's interesting. But what you find is that if we can re-extend telomeres, we can probably lower the risk of cancer. And there's some good studies in mice that demonstrate that. This is a paper I put out at the bottom there with a friend of mine at Harvard about telomerase and cancer, complex relationship. Makes this a little clearer. A lot of people think that telomerase causes cancer. Not a bit of it. There's a complicated relationship. It's not that it does or doesn't, it depends. Now I want to talk about inputs and outputs for aging, upstream and downstream. There are a whole host of things, risk factors, that increase your rate of cell aging. And there are a whole lot of things downstream that you see as a result. So for example, if I jump up and down on my knees for most of my life playing basketball, or if I get head injuries playing rugby or American football, I'm likely to cause increased damage, and the result will be osteoarthritis or closed head injury or Alzheimer's disease. The question, though, is what's going on center stage. And there we go back to cells, the cells that are aging. You age because your cells age. The question is, how do they do that? And more importantly, as we'll see, what can we do about it? So let me take a slight detour to disease. This is Len Hayflick, who first defined the Hayflick limit, a friend of mine. And he said something very interesting and wise. The cause of death is ignored by the same people who argue that aging is the greatest risk factor for disease. Example, say that any of you who are in medicine, nursing, come to me and you say, I've got a patient, and I want to know if they have Alzheimer's disease. I'm only allowed to ask one question. What's the one question I should ask? Not family history, not ApoE4 genes, not history of head injury or encephalitis or exposure to radiation or toxins. The question is how old they are. Because I don't care how many risk factors you have, 5-year-olds generally don't get Alzheimer's, 85-year-olds generally do. So that's your first question, and it accounts for most of the variance. It's not the only part of the variance, but it's the key factor, and we tend to ignore it. This is an example of some of the upstream and downstream things involved. In this case, mostly involved with CNS disease, that is Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and so on. There's a whole host of things that are upstream, but they all come through a central stage. This is something that I got invited to talk about when I was organizing a conference on Alzheimer's disease and animal models back in Washington years ago. We have a lot of knowledge about the upstream risk factors. We know a lot. We have a lot of knowledge about the downstream outcomes. We know a lot. What we don't tend to know is what happens in between. If I have 2 ApoE4 genes, it increases my risk of Alzheimer's. Why? If I have head injury, it increases my risk of Alzheimer's. Why? Right? That's what we tend not to focus on. And that's really the topic of this conversation. So we're talking about upstream risk factors like age and a lot of other risks that involve age-related diseases, then the central process, and then downstream outcomes, biomarkers, if you will. And the question I have is not what causes it or all the details of it. I want to know what the optimal point of intervention is, both clinically and financially. Not only can I do it for $10 billion, but can I do it for $1,000? Can I do it for $100? Can I intervene effectively and safely and do it so people can afford it worldwide? And as you'll see, I think we can. So now let me talk a little bit about actual reversal. Back 30 years ago next month, I gave the first talk ever at the National Institutes of Health here in Bethesda, Maryland, on aging, reversing aging. And I made a comment then that I want to reiterate now, which is, I said, listen, anybody who leaves this auditorium in an hour and thinks you can reverse aging is naive. But anybody who leaves this room in an hour and thinks you can't reverse aging is just as naive. The question you need to leave yourself with is, where's the data? So let me tell you about the data, I said. And that's still the key question. It's not a matter of debate, it's a matter of data. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the data. First question you should ask yourself is, does it work? For example, if we try to intervene by resetting telomere lengths, does it change gene expression? And the answer is yes. If anybody ever says to me, can we reverse aging? The answer is, yeah, we first did it in 1998 in a classic paper by Bodnar et al. in Science, the journal Science. These were a group of friends of mine out in California in Menlo Park at Jaron, most of them. And what they found is that you can take human fibroblasts from your skin, use telomerase, and you reset the pattern of gene expression back to what it was. Interesting. So yes, we know we can reverse aging in cells in the laboratory. Can we do better? Yeah, you can actually. This is a paper that Walter Funk and his group, again, out in Jaron in California, friends of mine, on skin aging. I actually had to take Walter out for a drink, a couple of beers, to get him to explain this all. Went back and looked at his slides, went back and read his paper before it made sense, because it was a hard paper to understand. But the outcome is this. They took human skin cells from young people, put them on mice, and they grow what looks like young human skin. You put old skin on mice, they're immunocompromised, and they grow what looks like old human skin. It slops easily, doesn't interdigitate. It's old skin. But if you take those old human skin cells and telomerize them and put them on mice, they grow young human skin. So we know we can reset human skin, in this case, ex vivo on an animal. The question is, what else can we do? And the answer is, for one thing, we can do it in bones. This is another article by Udo et al. Back in 2001, followed by vascular endothelial cells, VE cells. And the same thing, they grew them and then they put them back into animals, and you find that when you do it ex vivo, you can go ahead and grow young tissue. So basically, we could take old coronary artery tissue that has disease, telomerize it, and grow young coronary artery tissue. Interesting. But still, that doesn't help, because the question is, can we do it to people? Well, the next answer to that came up first from a study by Rhonda Pino at Harvard, but he changed the germ cell line. Now, this is Maria Blasco's work in Madrid, another friend of mine. And what she did, she and De Jesus, and in fact, a couple of other people that we know, did this using an AAV vector and a common promoter, kind of thing that we've used for human trials as well. For example, the Zolgensma work. But what she showed is that she can actually not only increase the lifespan, depending on how old the animal starts with, but increase the behavior, the physiology. And in fact, no matter where you look in the animal, it's better. What's interesting is that technically she could only barely affect a few cells, and yet she got this kind of difference. Question is, can we affect more cells? And the answer is, yeah, we probably can. So a number of years ago, some people came to me and said, can we take this to human trial? And this is the group involved. These are the kind of companies they worked for all over the world. Many of them speak multiple languages, as I do. They've worked for Roche, for Pfizer, they've worked for Airbus. They've managed major computer systems worldwide. They're all working for us for free, not because they are gung-ho about this, but because they see this as an opportunity and something we can probably do if we do it carefully, if we do it rigorously. So we're all in this for the long run. We now have offers, global offers of money to do this, and we'd like to take it to human trials. But it's quite a group. What we're going to do is we're going to actually reset telomere lengths in people, in real patients. We're going to start with Alzheimer's patients. We're first going to probably do a dog study because the FDA will probably require it. And then we'll move on to human trials. We have at least 2 ways of doing this, and the technology is changing so fast that if I go through a couple of weeks, I'm talking about a different serotype, a different promoter, a different gene sequence. Things are changing very rapidly. But, and likewise with the mRNA work and lipid nanoparticles. But that's essentially what we're going to do in a very quick nutshell. So let me tell you a little bit about the future too. These are just US healthcare costs over the past, say, 50 years. And as you can see, as a percentage of GDP, it's doubled basically. And age-related healthcare also. We think that we can end up taking that curve and bringing it down. That is, if I'm looking at, for example, the cost of Alzheimer's disease in a developed nation, the last year of life, it's about $100,000 US dollars for that last year of life without making it any better. Our best estimate 3 years ago on a sort of a napkin calculation is that we can probably reverse Alzheimer's for the tune of about $30,000. And that's before we begin to get economies of scale and increased technology. We think we can actually lower the cost of healthcare, not raise it, not give you something more expensive that gives you another year, but actually lower the cost of healthcare personally, nationally, and globally too, everywhere if we can do this. This is a kind of an epidemiologic view of what's going on in the past couple of centuries. If you look at microbial disease deaths, they peaked with Spanish flu early in the 1900s, about 1920. But microbial disease has been going downhill because we begin to understand how bacteria work, how viruses work, how immunization works. And it's made a tremendous difference in what's happened. In fact, this year, most nations have a hit rate for infectious disease less than 5%. Iceland is estimated to go less than 1%. That is strikingly different than what it was 200, 300 years ago. In fact, if we go back far enough, go 500 years, almost all of us died of infectious disease. That's different. Age-related disease, on the contrary, has gone up. And now about 75% of people on the average, this is taken from US and UK literature, but it applies in most countries. Japan, Korea come to mind immediately. But the age-related disease percentage of death has gone up enormously. 3/4 of us die of age-related disease because we live long enough to age. What we're suggesting will happen is something a little different, and that is this. We're suggesting that we can actually take age-related disease and bring it down. So the most remarkable thing that's ever happened in medicine globally over the past 200 years is microbial revolution. We finally understood what caused disease. If I go back 1,000 years, probably one of the history's greatest physicians, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, wrote a textbook that was still in print 750 years later. He knew more about plague than anybody 1,000 years ago, but he didn't know what caused it. He could diagnose it better than anybody, but he didn't know what caused it because nobody knew about these invisible little things, funguses, viruses, bacteria, that cause disease. And we begin to learn that. And as a result, the cost of infectious disease has gone down as well as deaths. I think we're about to do that for age-related disease. We're going to do something that's never happened before. We're going to show that we can cure and prevent age-related diseases. That's where we're trying to go. And the last question I want to ask you before we invite questions and discuss all this is why do it? Okay. It's very easy for people to look at children dying of infectious disease and have the compassion needed to do something about it. Very few of us can sit there calmly and not think about children dying of infectious disease. Partly it's because we've been there, and partly because it's sort of our programming. We are a little less common, a little less likely to do that when it comes to older people. Again, we tend to think aging just happens. What do you expect? Why do anything? I think it's the wrong question. I want to ask a question that originally was asked of Margaret Mead. This may be an apocryphal story, but I put it in my book as well. Margaret Mead, one of the world's greatest anthropologists, was once asked, what is the first sign of civilization? And the students thought she'd say pottery, or cave drawings, or stone axe, or evidence of fire. And she said, a healed femur. And the reason is a healed femur implies that you and I and our group of people cared enough about that person with a broken femur to protect them, feed them, care for them for the months it took to heal that femur so they could get up again. I think that's the sort of thing that defines a civilization, the compassion to want to do something for people who are suffering. And for a long time, we weren't able to do anything for infectious disease. For a long time, we've not been able to do anything for age-related disease, but I think we're about to. So to put this in perspective, I think that most of the things that we're going after are the rabbits. We go for the small thing. So to quote one of my favorite poets, Li Bai, if you only hunt rabbits, the tigers and dragons go uncaught. I think it's time when it comes to longevity, aging, age-related diseases, we go hunting for the tigers and lions, not the rabbits. Thank you. That's all I had to say for you guys today, except for...
Yeah, I'm coming.
Wow. Thank you so much, Prof. That was an interesting presentations and lectures. And one thing that I appreciate when it comes to reading your work is how you simplify everything. You don't make them complex. I've gone through most of your works, your literatures and everything. You tend to turn it down in a way that everyone, and both those in social sciences, those in other disciplines, they're able to understand what you're trying to explain. So we now move over to question asking. Please, if you have any question, just raise your hand. And then when I call you, you ask your question. Please just mute. I don't know why we always unmute ourselves. We distracted our instructor along the line, so many times. So if you have any question, raise your hand and call you, then you ask your question. Thank you.
Although we survived it, so.
Okay, Oganzeke, you ask first.
Yes, good. Well, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, Prof. This has been a very, very exciting presentation. And I mean, what you're saying is that it is possible to cure aging, and it is within grasp, so to speak.
Yes. Back in 2001, I got offered literally $1 billion to take this to translational work, and we would have failed because we didn't have the technology to do it now. Then we barely do now. I think we can pull this off. I'm not sure how far we can pull it off, but yes, it's the first time I think in human history we've had the tools we needed to do it. It's like, again, like microbial disease, you couldn't do anything until you had a microscope and the ability to culture bacteria and the ability to, it took some small technological tweaks to pull this off. Likewise here.
I'm just thinking about I mean, this is a great disrupting thought, because usually we are told about eating healthy, we're told about all the things you have to do. I mean, I'm sure they hold value, but what you're saying is beyond just that, it's possible to engineer it.
Let me give you an example of this. Say that we're back in 1950, before the first polio vaccine came out, and you said to me, how can I make sure my children don't get polio? I would tell you to avoid certain people. I'd say eat well. I'd tell you all sorts of things, but none of that would prevent polio. I think in fact, there was a book in about 1952, something about diet conquers polio. Well, diet doesn't conquer polio, although it might have improved your immune function enough that maybe you wouldn't get paralytic polio. Nobody knows. But I think we're there. That's the same place now. We're talking about all these things that we should do to be healthy. It usually involves diet and exercise, low stress. And in fact, everything your grandmother told you to do that most of us don't do anyway. We still smoke and drink and drive fast and do things we shouldn't. But none of those things reverse aging. Some of them will slow it. The better you take care of your body, the longer it lasts. I had a friend who had a car, kept it for 50 years. And the reason it survived is not because it was a great car, it's because he cared for it. We're talking about not just caring for your car, but actually resetting the entire thing.
Amazing. Resetting the entire thing. The possibilities are mind-blowing, Prof.
Within limits. I sometimes talk about Humpty Dumpty effects. Some things, you can break them, you can't get back. So for example, I mean, a trivial example, but say you've had osteoarthritis and you had a knee replacement. I can't do much about it because the knee cells are gone. So,
Sure.
but short of that, also there are some diseases that aren't strictly speaking aging, but occurs as we get older. An example here would be silicosis. Say you and I are miners, and we just spent the last 40 years in a mine, and we've inhaled silica dust our whole life. That's not aging. I can make your pneumocytes young again, but I can't remove all the silica dust. That's, it's a problem I can't fix. So there are lots of things I can't fix. And the other question is, how well can I fix it? If I look at Maria Blasco's work, she only actually got about 1% of the neurons, or 1% of the microglia and about 5% of the neurons, and yet the animals acted younger. What if we could up that to 50%, to 80%, to 100% of those neurons and those microglia? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know how far we can do, how well we can do this. It's early days. It's sort of like, most people I think are sort of like the balloon people back in 1895 in Paris. Their idea of aerodynamics was a better and better hot air balloon. Well, the Wright brothers, some 8 years later, came along with a different idea. But even when the Wright brothers proved you could have power flight, they still couldn't get across the Atlantic carrying hundreds of people in safety at high altitude and getting there in a matter of hours. No, we're sort of in the Wright brothers stage. I think we've proven you can have powered flight in a sense. The question is, how well can we do it, and when can we start carrying safe passengers?
Yeah. Not to hog the room, Prof. You mentioned something about the cancer and aging. So what this is, where's the interface? What's the research saying? Because I know that this is a major unknown.
It is.
For the human race. So I mean, after this, I'll keep quiet, but I really just wanted to have an idea. I just want to have an idea where this is going. Is it going to help with cancer research? Is it going to reset things all the way? How? I mean, what is research saying to you with this? Because it's truly, truly mind-boggling and exciting.
Well, if I looked at the mice, for example, that Maria Blasco did in Madrid, she found that even though she had telomerase expression, there was absolutely no increase in cancer rate, which is what I would expect. That is probably what you're doing is resetting gene repair. So you're getting less accumulation of mutations because you're correcting the errors faster, not letting them sit around. It gets complicated, but that's a simple way of looking at it. On the other hand, there's probably a fine point in there. That is, if you've got cells that have ceased dividing because the telomeres have gotten so short, they have mutations, but they can't divide and make a clinical cancer because they can't divide. If they get just a little bit more, they may be able to divide and go on to create a cancer. But if you've got DNA repair all the way revved up, then you probably have less cancer. So what actually are we going to find in human trials? I suspect what we're going to find, for good reason again, but I suspect it. It's not data, it's my suspicion, that we'll find we can actually decrease the rate of human cancer, certainly age-related cancers. Having said that, one of our initial exclusion criteria will be people with a history of cancer, because we don't want to take a chance initially.
Okay, so thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you,
think
Prof.
one of the things, one of the things that I would have loved to add is that early life and late life accumulated damages are reacted to differently, and some things cannot be handled by prevention because we are talking about something that must have accumulated over the years, and then intervention is a do with that. That is where the engineering and the solutions that Prof is talking about comes in. So there is no two ways about that. That's just what has to be done. So I think also, Nzube, you had wanted to ask a question.
In line with what you just said while we're waiting for the question, let me give you another example of sort of Humpty Dumpty phenomena. That is, sometimes the egg is broken and you can't get it back. And that is, let's look at Alzheimer's. And I'm going to make up these numbers. But let's say I've got a patient with mild Alzheimer's and they've lost 1% of their neurons, and they've got 9% of their neurons that are sort of damaged but hanging in, and the rest are fine. I can't get back that 1%, but I can probably fix the 9%. So again, some things I can't get back. Even there are exceptions. It looks like if you look at the DePinto work, you find regrowth of neural stem cells and differentiation of neural stem cells and increase in brain volume. That is, the neurons regrow. Still, the problem is that those neural connections carried information. So yes, maybe your brain works better, but you still may not remember who your grandmother is until you go meet her again and get reintroduced. I'm sort of being very simplistic about this, but the point I'm making is there are probably limits we don't know about yet. And we're yet to see what they're going to be. Back to my point to the NIH, if you think you can do it or not do it, it's not the question. The question is what happens when you do it.
Yes. Yes. Nzube, can you ask your question? Nzube, are you there?
Good evening, House. I think I'm having a little.
Okay. There's a network problem, and Chibuikem Okoro, you can ask your question. Chibuikem Okoro. Whilst you're trying to unmute yourself, Mr. Onyeka, if you're ready, you can ask your question.
Yeah, I'm ready. Thank you, Prof, for this presentation. I'm excited to be here today. My question is this different from STEM therapy? Because I know about STEM therapy and the research and everything going on STEM therapy. So is this the reversing of this age reversing process you're talking about? Is it the same thing with STEM therapy? That's my question.
No, although there are parallels. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you've got severe osteoarthritis and your chondrocytes in your knee are essentially gone. And what you'd like to do is cure the knee. Again, you can do a total knee replacement, expensive, painful, but say you wanted to use stem cells. So say that we had good enough stem cells that we could put in there that will regrow the surface of the knee. Now, there are two ways to do that. You could have stem cells that you've harvested and put in there, or maybe you could have stem cells you've reversed their aging using the approach we've talked about and put in there. What we're suggesting is not doing that, but simply not taking out your cells and treating them and putting them back in, but actually taking the cells that are in there and just resetting them. So rather than, for example, adding stem cells, we're going to essentially take the cells you've got and set them back to young cells so that they repopulate the knee and you have a normal chondrocyte knee surface. That's the target. Now, initially, we're going after Alzheimer's for very strategic reasons. After that, our next target will be cardiovascular disease, and after that, it'll be things like osteoarthritis and chronic renal disease and so on. But you see the difference between the stem cells, where you have them from the outside, and our approach, which is to simply take your old cells and tell them to be young again. An analogy we sometimes use is a symphony orchestra. If I've got, I'm going to take two kinds of music. I don't know who likes what and who doesn't. Let's take Mozart versus John Cage atonal pieces. I use that a lot. But the difference between an orchestra playing that and the orchestra playing this is not different instruments. It's not that the oboe reed is broken or the first violinist is drunk. The difference is they're playing a different score. And what we're suggesting is when it comes to the stem cell work, don't replace the first violinist. Simply tell her the score that you want her to play. That is, play the one you like, not the one you didn't like. That is, play the young one, not the old one. Don't replace the first violinist. Don't use stem cells. Just tell her to play the piece right. She's not drunk. It's not that the violin is out of tune. It's that she's playing a piece you don't like, getting old.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. Thank you. Doesn't mean I'm right, but hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Gladys, you can ask your question. Okay. Chibuikem, okay. Gladys,
I'm
go
there.
ahead.
I'm there.
Okay.
I'm there.
Ask your question. After that, Gladys, Chibuikem, go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Prof. Good evening, Osinakachi. My question is, why during the the research uh, the research uh, methodology for trying to reverse aging or during the experimental phase of trying to reverse aging. My question is, why do the scientists normally choose partial epigenetic reprogramming instead of full epigenetic reprogramming? I understand that sometimes when the full epigenetic reprogramming is chosen, the cells tends to lose their identity. So I understand that, but I want to actually know the reason why this partial epigenetic reprogramming is always chosen.
I'm going to try to answer that, Chibuki, but come back to me if I don't answer the right question. Okay, I'm going to go back to that analogy of the symphony orchestra. So again, I'll take a piece. The orchestra was playing Mozart when you were young, and now it's playing John Cage, and you don't like the tune. Okay, you have several choices. Our option would be to say, listen, go to the conductor, say, here's the score I want you to play, the one you used to play that we like. Play this one, not that one we don't like. Okay. Now consider each instrument in the orchestra as a gene, and each musician in the orchestra as the epigenetic expression for that gene. They're playing the gene. Okay. And I'd like them to play, as it were, Mozart again. Right? I have a couple of options, though. I could go and take away, could replace the gene. I could go and say, you've got a bad gene, ApoE4, for example, as a risk factor for Alzheimer's. I'm going to replace your gene, take away your violin and give you another violin, a better tuned violin, okay? I could replace the musician, okay? And that happens when you begin to get people who are looking for specific epigenetic factors, and they're going in with proteomics, for example, or a particular mRNA to try to change the violinist. Or you could do it more broadly. You could say, let's go in with Yamanaka factors, which is equivalent to saying, let's see if we can tell the string section to play Mozart. Yes, but what about the percussion section? What about the brass section? Do you see what I mean? So almost everything that people do that involves epigenetic work, which is a good idea, is done piecemeal. Again, it would be like saying we're going to treat biomarkers. We're going to treat individual genes, individual patterns of gene expression, rather than the entire symphonic orchestration. And what we're saying is that's a good idea, but it's not enough. You know, it's not enough in case of COVID to treat just your fever, your leukocytosis, your hypoxia. You need to treat the viral infection that caused those things. The same thing really is true here when we're dealing with epigenetic issues. It's not enough to treat an individual instrument, that gene, that expression, that section of the orchestra. We want to treat the entire thing, the cause of it, the system's view of this entire thing, rather than individual pieces of it. Does that help? If not, please ask me again and see if I can try again.
Okay. I quite got some of your explanation.
Okay.
Yes.
I probably got some of your questions, so we're even. Okay.
I got a part of your explanation. So it's just as being like a kind of, it is the condition that determines what goes in and what goes out. So, for instance, if we have a situation whereby the environment A is not suitable with a certain a certain procedure, then you have to choose the environment B with a good option that is suitable for that procedure. So that's what I just understood here. So another question, Prof, is recently we saw in the media.
Sorry, Chibike. There is something that is very important that I would want us to note here with regards to the partial epigenetic expression and why it's been used. I think with my basic knowledge of senescing and the rejuvenation therapy and all that, I think there is a core reason why partial epigenetic expression is being allowed because of the core identity of the person. You can't just do things like magic, right?
Yes.
Who's speaking? Okay, you can't just do things as magic, understand? So reversing cellular age is, whilst you want to reverse cellular age, it's very important that you maintain the crucial identity and also the safety of the body cells. These things are very, very important, you understand, because it helps for it helps in providing safer alternative to genetic manipulation, right? In whatever you do, risk management is very important. So it's not about the radicality of what you want to achieve, but it's very important that you progress gradually without causing havoc.
Yes, yes, Osinachi, I agree with you. Like I said before, it's just like I understand initially it's about all about why they choose that is just all about for the self not to lose its identity and like you said become a risk. You understand? So in a bid to eliminate that, I think that is why it is being chosen. So it's just like in my explanation, it's all about options when the options there. So thank you very much for further explanation. So I think I also got something from that. You talked about risk management. So it's something I that quite resonated with me further. So to Prof, I want to ask one more question. Then I will drop down my hand. My question is recently we saw in the media one of the foremost researchers, David Sinclair, when he made a public statement that aging is curable and very soon that the human clinical trials are going to come up. So my question is, because when I researched further on that, I discovered that he used a foundational principle by the Yamaka, using Yamaka factors to
Right.
to proceed with his own research. But there's something quite fascinating I discovered. I discovered that he's also working on another, principle, he wants to also use for this human trial. And I want to understand is the Yamaka factor and the one he is trying to work on, is there any difference?
Between
The thing, sorry, the thing is that he didn't, and Chibike did not mention the factor of David Sinclair. Yeah, there is
David,
already. Okay, go ahead.
David doesn't understand aging. And I'll give you an example of this. David talks about aging as information loss. And I understand that because, again, if I look at my gene expression from age 70, gene expression now, the pattern of gene expression is different. And there are accumulated errors of mutations as I get older because I'm not repairing things as well. So he looks at it and says information loss, to which begs the original question of, well, then how come the information wasn't lost for 4 billion years? How come it's only getting lost in the next couple of decades? You can't just say it happens, information loss causes aging, without explaining why it doesn't happen sometimes. And it happens at different rates in different species and different rates in progeritor children and so on. So David is not broadening his view enough to ask what's really going on. He's looking just at information loss. I understand it, but that's again like saying the world is flat because it doesn't look around to me because you haven't been around it. He's not looking broadly at the full biology involved. So his outcome is that he sees something that's new and very intriguing, which is Yamanaka factors. But again, when I talked about it with regard to a symphony orchestra, that's what he's doing. He's trying a Yamanaka factor or a couple of Yamanaka factors to try to affect the strings or just a couple of the instruments in the brass section, rather than saying the whole pattern needs to change, the whole epigenetic pattern, because it's not simply the brass section. It's not simply those sets of genes that are affected by that set of Yamanaka factors. It's the entire orchestration and the interaction between them. You know, in any orchestra and in genes too, and in epigenetic expression, it's not just a matter of individual instruments. They have to play well together. The tempo has to be right. The way the orchestration moves back and forth across has to be right. Same thing is true of your genes. It's not simply, let's turn them up, let's turn them down, let's make it on or off. It is a complicated interactive effect that's going on all the time. That's why we need to address this at the level of the orchestration, not at the level of the individual instrument. That's why I wish David all the luck in the world, but no.
Okay, so thank you so much, Prof. I think there is also one of the things that you know, when I joined the aging movement, the aging society newly, I was so excited until I started getting into the whole thing. You know, there are some statements that look so exciting, but when you look at it critically, you start understanding that there is more to that. Like saying, like the common statement that David always say, like aging, it's a disease, and that disease is treatable. So we just make aging like malaria or infectious disease. And it takes away the rejuvenation and regenerative aspect of aging. Because the illustration that you gave with your friend's car, I think that's a perfect example for what aging is, the maintenance. And that is one of the things that we need to really understand when it comes to aging, so that we don't make complex statement when it comes to talking about aging, its related diseases and condition. Someone also talked about cancer here. Cancer is also, aging is also a driver. Yeah, because no matter how you look at it, the foundational driver is aging, right? Biological aging. So they're also the drive. So these are the things that I would want us to understand. I think I might also bring back Prof again, but we really need to take it a step at a time, because we're going to have more lectures and more lectures before this cohort finishes. We'll have a whole lot of scholars talking about this same thing very well, so that we ask our question, get perspective, broader perspective about it, and then we'll be able to make out something. So another thing is that the essence is for us to think through our immediate environment. What are we going to do? How are we going to solve this same problem? What are we going to do differently? What can we integrate with what we have? And how can we join forces together in providing solutions with regards to this? So I'm glad you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. In fact, I was just wondering, why did OC have to speak about aging before I get to ask my question? Because he actually almost answered my second question, which is on treating aging as a problem. Would that actually help in getting people to actually understand that the age is not the problem, but aging can also be regarded as a problem? That's where we get to actually now treat it properly and not just see everything as, oh, once you have come of age, there are certain illnesses, there are certain diseases that comes with that age. So that's actually supposed to be my first question. But the question I want to ask now is, sorry, can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
So when we talk about longevity, what is the place of nutrition in all of this? I am a salad master health coach, and as such, I get to meet different people who have different opinions and ideas of when we talk about the role of nutrition in aging and our general well-being. Yesterday, I was with a family who claimed that, oh, even though some of the cooking techniques and talking about metallic reaction and all of that and the role they play in our health, that his parents and their parents before them, they didn't use these methods I'm talking about, but the father died at the age of 101 and the mom died at 96. But when I asked a simple question, up until their deaths, were there any kind of illness that they were treating? He said yes, that the dad had Alzheimer's, which of course is a normal thing for someone that lives up to that age. And because I've already gone through this class on Saturday, I was able to make him understand that no, that your dad lived up to 100 years and beyond does not mean he must necessarily have Alzheimer's. Now that Alzheimer's, I take it as accumulation of the lifestyle he has been living, what he has been feeding the body with, and all of that. Now it got him to pause and have a rethink. But my question is, how can I incorporate this to make people understand that it's not really about how long you live, but also but majorly the quality of life you live. So because during the course of the conversation, he said the dad from 70, he had high blood pressure, he had diabetes, then eventually he now had Alzheimer's. But before that conversation, he believed it's expected at that age. But from your lecture now, if we are to treat aging as a sickness and not see age as the problem, I think a lot of people will get to understand more that is not, it doesn't come with age, but is a precedent or a consequence of what we have been doing. So my main question is, how can I properly explain that to someone that the aging is the problem and not the age?
Oh, so many questions in there. Let me start by saying, there's always this argument about whether aging is a disease or not. And I don't care. To me, it's like arguing about whether it's programmed or whether it's sort of medieval theological arguments in some ways. I notice sometimes that biologists or physicians who will say that aging is not a disease are dyeing their hair, getting Botox, replacing their knees, and so on, using statins. And so they're acting as though it's a disease, but telling me it's not. I don't care. And likewise, the FDA in the US has the same issue. And I sort of don't care. Tell me what I'm allowed to measure, what you want me to call it, and I will do it. So I'm going to go after a disease, Alzheimer's, rather than aging. But the only way I do that is for me to go after aging. Now, back to that question about things like nutrition. I don't care. All of us should be eating probably a better diet than we do, whatever that really is. We argue. Exercise, however much is really appropriate, we argue. Lowering our stress, a lot of other things. We know that. But none of those things are you going to make it to 150 years old. You may delay the onset of a disease. You may delay the onset of aging, but you're not going to make it to 150. We're talking about something a little different. Back to another point you raised, which is, the quality of life. I sometimes say, as an example, let's say I could prove to you, I can't. Let's say I could prove to you that if I locked you in the basement in the dark and you never talked to anybody and you ate cardboard, you'd be healthy for 150 years. You'd say, no, thank you. I have no interest in that. That's not a life at all. Back to your point again. It's not just the length of life, it's the quality of life. And we're not talking about extending infinite lifespan. We're talking about doing something about health. I'm not interested in curing aging. I'm interested in curing fear, pain, discomfort, panic. I'm interested in the things that actually affect people's souls, that make their life miserable. It's not aging. It's the things that go along with it. It's the not being able to remember your spouse's name. It's finding you can't get out of bed without hurting. It's finding you're short of breath, and so on. Those are things that we're targeting. To do that, we target aging. But aging's aging. And again, I don't care whether you call it a disease or not. I'm interested in doing something to make people's lives better and trying to ensure that people can afford to do it too. Incidentally, both of our global investors said the same thing. They said, one, don't tell anybody who we are because otherwise we get bothered. Two, don't tell anybody how much we're going to invest in you. Fine. But they both said the same thing that interested me as the third thing, which is In the long run, we're not interested in making $1 billion. We're interested in making sure this makes the world a better place. My kind of people. So yes, let's see if we can make the world a better place for people, not just doctors, not just diseases, not just actuaries, but people.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. I think that makes it a bit easier. I think I can try to incorporate this in my presentations to get more people to be aware that it's not just about how long we live, it's about the quality of life that we live that really matters. And instead of looking at aging as something we should fear, we should actually look at what we can do to mitigate the illnesses that come with the aging. Thank you very much. That is quite helpful.
My pleasure. Thank you, Gladys.
I think, if I may, this reminds me of my presentation at University of Johannesburg. So after my presentation, a couple of professors, I was telling them I was presenting a paper when we wanted to sign an MOU with them on the problematics of aging in Africa and what we can do to bridge the longevity divide in Africa and then close the life expectancy gap. So, some of the professors were like, so are you saying because I am old, then I have a disease? I said, no, because some of them misconstrues chronological aging for biological aging. And that's where the problem is. And that took me back to the problem that we had with the classification of disease, the 11th International Classification of Disease by World Health Organization, when they classified, the pushback they had when they classify aging as a disease, right? So some of the primary concern was the exacerbation of ageism. Most of them, I think, including Professor Hofman from University of Northwest South Africa, who specialize in intergenerational aspect of aging. So the pushback, he engineered the pushback from South Africa. So I had a meeting also in his house, tried to explain everything to him, but he was like, no, that's ageism. Now, the problem is that most people seem not to understand the thin line and the meeting point between chronological aging and biological aging. And that becomes a very big problem in people's understanding of aging. I've argued that the baseline that we can do, looking at the evolutionary aspect of aging, is that is very important for us Africans to really come back to our biodiversity. Very important. And most of the cases that I'm making, I'm pushing there, is that when it comes to nutrition, most of the curriculum that the universities in Africa are using in teaching nutritionists are Western-based nutrition, and none of them answers the problem of nutrition in Africa. There is a gap in genetic and evolutionary nutrition and longevity nutrition with regards to Africa. And most of our foods are going extinct. And most of the diseases we have in Africa today were not there, let's say, 20 to 50 years ago. And I believe that there is a huge impact on there's a huge impact when we depend solely on ultra-processed food and boxed food.
Yes.
So I think that whilst we are interested in healthy longevity, we should also understand the need to really eat right. So that's what you can't just place them side by side, but I think it's very important. It got its own existential locus in the pursuit of longevity. And so Professor Fossil stressed on healthy longevity. So instead of focusing more on trying to just solve aging and all that, just like most of the transhumanists, radical transhumanists say, oh, we are fighting that. We are not fighting that. we are biological life extensions, and we believe that we can do what we can in improving the quality of life of people and then give them a healthy lifespan. No, it's not mind dependent. Okay. Okay. Prof, any more comments, any more questions before we wrap it up for the day?
I just want to add to what you just said about, for example, nutrition. What we're talking about is reversing the aging process, but that doesn't reverse the damage. It doesn't, how do I put this? It's not the only problem. You know, if you have a terrible, terrible diet, nothing but say processed foods as an example, but a terrible diet, however you define it, I can't fix that. If you sit in a couch all day and do nothing, I can't fix that. If you go out and damage yourself by doing wildly dangerous things, I can't fix that. I can try to fix aging, but I can't fix those other things. Those are your lifestyle choices, not mine.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. But that's why we really need more of education with regards to this, because most people do not know. And most people just live their life. There is this common balance in Nigeria that is becoming so like an aphorism that people saying all die is die. So whatever happens, people must die. So it becomes problematic and people care less about their body. So yeah, thank you so much, Prof. I'll call on Dr. Nyok to give us the closing remarks, and then we prepare for tomorrow classes. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, Dr. Nyok, are you there?
Yes, I am. I am here. I'm here. You took
Okay.
me unaware. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Fossell, for your lecture. It was quite eye-opening and interesting. Just like OC Nakachi would say, I'm beginning to develop a very serious interest in longevity, particularly Afrolongevity. And your lecture today was quite interesting. I want to think that I'm also seeing the minds of other participants here that your lecture today was quite eye-opening, challenging, quite critical at the same time. Yes, I noted a handful of so many things that you said, and I think that other participants also did, and I could see that in the quality of questions that they posed to you, the repeated questions, the sustained questions. I want to hope, just like Nakachi said, that we'll be having more of you in our community as days and the years go by, and that the final objective of having this kind of cohort session will be achieved, which is that the quality of life will be improved for aging people like us, like aging species, because we would always age, and we are aging, whether chronologically, whether biologically, we'll always age, but at least the quality of our life should. And I want to say that your lecture today has contributed in expanding our horizon on that particular perspective. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, C. Thank you, Professor Fossell.
Let me add two things. One I said before, which is anybody who wants to contact me on LinkedIn, please do. The other is anybody who wants to know more about it, they can try my book, which is out now too. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
see you all tomorrow.